Want to get some coffee?
That's
The blooper's reel.
yeah, I know it. 3, 2. Hello, I'm Stacy Smith, and welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. This is where we discuss the political state of things and whatever else might come to our minds. As we've discussed previously, the race between President Trump and his challenger, Joe Biden, is tightening, especially here in the state of Pennsylvania. And the Commonwealth is also considered one of the key states that could swing the election to one candidate or the other. So to begin our discussion today, we'll bring in our group of panelists. And I'm going to introduce them to you now. Joining us is the former chairman of the State Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, Jim Byrne. Jim also served as chairman of the Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millvale. He is now an attorney in the city of Pittsburgh. On the other side of the table, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith's political background is strong, dating back to the Reagan campaign in 1980. He was the state director for former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum for the state of Pennsylvania, and Keith was also an advisor to Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith now has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. Going back to the Democrat side of the table, we find Amanda Green Hawkins. Amanda served as a national committee woman representing Pennsylvania to the Democratic National Party. Amanda also served on Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union based here in Pittsburgh. And now to round out our group of analysts today, we go back across the table to the Republican side and we find Mayor Chris Fry. Chris is a unique perspective on politics. He's the mayor of Newcastle, which gives him some insight on how federal and state governments actually work at the local level. He is also in an area of Pennsylvania that helped Donald Trump win Pennsylvania in the last presidential election. It's an area the Democrats would like to take back. Thank all of you for joining us here on Around the Table. So let's do this. Let's begin our discussion. Jim Byrne, what's going to work in Pennsylvania to pull in those rare people who are independents who have yet to make up their mind?
There aren't many. That's really the crux of what's left between now and the general, and in many instances between now and when ballots are mailed in, which could be in some places days. The independent voter, the end game will be there. What's going to swing them? Well, what do we see in the polls across the board? COVID and the economy. Who do the independents think is going to be better suited to address these issues moving forward? And day by day by day, we continue to see polling that strongly suggests that demographic here in Pennsylvania and across the nation is moving into the Biden column. If that trend continues, it will be difficult, very, very difficult for Mr. Trump to A, catch up where most polls have him behind, and B, hold serve in states that he flipped red from blue, including Pennsylvania. It's not an accident, Stacey, that we're seeing Mr. Trump, Mr. Pence, Mr. Biden all over Western Pennsylvania. And if your viewers will recall that in the waning weeks of the 2016 general, we saw a similar situation happen in this part of the country. I am convinced that the modeling is showing both camps that Pennsylvania will be won or lost based on who does better in that independent demographic and in Western Pennsylvania. That's why we're seeing so much of them, and that's why we're going to see much more of them in the weeks ahead.
Keith, given what Jim just said, are you ready to throw in the towel?
No, not quite yet. I'm actually feeling pretty bullish. I think all the polls that in the states that are consequential to an electoral vote victory are tightening. And I believe that really time is not the friend of the former vice president. I think he would like to see the election held next week and not in 53 or 54 days. Because the closer we get to election day, I think you're going to see a sense of a decision that has to be made of whether you believe that fundamentally that the president could recreate the economy that he was able to put together in the first 3 years prior to this pandemic. And there are a lot of people hurting right now. And a lot of times it does come down to, it's the economy, stupid. I heard that 30 years ago. And quite frankly, we talk about all these issues and it does come down to the economy. The economy is hurting. So we really have to determine whether, which candidate can take us from our knees to a standing position and bring vibrancy back to the American dream. The president is making a strong argument that he can do it again, and people are going to have to make an informed decision. Now, as far as independent voters are concerned, I think the debates obviously are going to mean a lot to independent voters, and I also think Corona the coronavirus cuts both ways. I mean, the president has taken his share of criticism, but there could be an argument that state governments, and I believe there is an argument, that state governments have overreached, that they went beyond the science and they hurt us in ways that they didn't need to hurt us, both economically and in the growth of our families and our welfare. Listen, I'm lucky that with my large contact list, I still am lucky that I don't know anyone personally who has succumbed to this virus, thank God. But let me tell you, I do know somebody who filed, I know multiple people who filed for bankruptcy. I know people who lost their jobs, lost their businesses, are suffering from depression, divorce. The ancillary cost of this pandemic is enormous. And at some point, I think people are going to try to make a decision whether government went too far at the state level. And I think as the days pass, the pressure is building and building and building. And I think that will cut for the president.
All right.
Well, we have two things going on, Stacey. We have the economy, yes, indeed. And we also have coronavirus. With the economy, it's not a global matter as much as it is a matter where people live, work, and play, what's happening with them at home. And we saw in the past 3 years how the president told people that their jobs were going to be there, how they didn't have to worry. There was a facility in the Midwest, a carrier facility, where people believed him, and they found out after he was elected that it wasn't true. They lost their jobs. So this whole economy is just going to turn on whether or not people believe Trump or Biden's going to help them get a job, keep a job, or be prepared for this future economy. And as far as the coronavirus goes, we have seen just yesterday with the information that came out with Bob Woodward's story, that the coronavirus response and what he knew and when he knew it is totally different from what he portrayed. And now we have a question of, there was always a question of credibility, but now even more so. And when you're talking about people concerned about jobs, unemployment rates and all of that, we're talking about a lot of low-wage workers. We're talking about disproportionate numbers of people of color. When we're talking about coronavirus and the impact on society with coronavirus, we're talking about people of color being disproportionately impacted. So when we're talking about who is left, there are some people in that who are left. And this story yesterday with Bob Woodward on the coronavirus, I think is going to turn more of those undecideds into the Biden camp.
All right, Mayor Fry, from your perspective and where you live in Newcastle, what do you think?
You know, you have to take a look at what each candidate has to offer in terms of it's truly economics, and it has to look at we're looking at the coronavirus and how it impacted that. I think Trump, from a local standpoint, and how the federal government addressed coronavirus, they did their best to get the resources out to the states or to the local communities to help them rebound. I think people recognize that, and it was a help. You know, a lot of local businesses, local governments were starting to get the trickle-down effect of some of the from Department of Community Economic Development from the state. The stronghold, like Keith said, is still on from, you know, where the state government, you know, has put all those barriers in terms of who can go back into facilities and put those restrictions on places. But I think from just conversations that I'm having and you know, in my day-to-day work, is that, you know, federally, I think it's just going to come down, especially with the election, it's going to come down to who can get us back to normal, who can give us that sense of normalcy back and make it a priority. And I think just with, obviously I'm Republican, but I look at both candidates, you know, with an open mind. And I'd rather see, you know, I think with what was taking place pre-COVID, you know, in terms of employment rate, job growth, economic growth in our community, there's a lot to be said. And I think Donald Trump definitely has a leg up in that he was, had success in that before getting in. Now, the character, his morals and things of that is I mean, he has 54 days to, you know, to clean up some of that stuff. That's going to be a heavy determinant in terms of where people vote. But again, people want to get back to normalcy. And again, like Keith said, those auxiliary things are really what's impacting people the most. And in these coming days, that's what folks are going to hang their hat on.
All right. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day that basically boiled it down to this as far as the state of Pennsylvania goes. And that is that it's now becoming a blue collar versus white collar election. And remarkably, and Keith and Jim, you guys can really speak to this because you've been in politics for a long time. It seems like the roles have been reversed. In the past, you'd always thought of the white collar worker as being a Republican and the blue collar worker being a Democrat. But according to this article, and you take a look around the state, it's changing. The blue collars are now in favor of the president, and the white collars in the suburbs are going toward the vice president, former vice president.
What's happening here is actually truly remarkable, and it's not over a period of 50 years. It's a period of maybe a decade. When I was active in politics 15 years ago, the collar counties of Philadelphia, Chester, Bucks, Montgomery, and Delaware, basically were used, those votes for the GOP were used to offset the loss you'd take in Philadelphia. And in most cases, it balanced pretty well. You would win those counties, those 4 suburban counties, by enough to take the pain of Philadelphia, and then you take the T and you can win the election. Obviously, we've seen that change dramatically. Those county seats are now in the control of Democrats. The people on the main line, as you say, the white-collar workers have shifted, and a lot of them still remain Republican, but are voting Democratic. But the other parts of the state are a remarkable change as well. When I was in politics, I would tell you, if you forced me to make a long-term decision, I would say Cambria would never be with us. Greene would never be with us. Fayette, Erie, Beaver, on and on and on, Luzerne, Lackawanna. And we're finding we're not only winning these counties, we're winning these counties by large margins. So the question is the enthusiasm, the turnout is going to be key. I mean, I think the Trump won this state by 44,000 last time. So it's really going to have to come down to your GOTV, getting out the vote, and are the blue collar voters that are now in Trump's column sufficiently motivated to vote? And I would say in the downturn of this economy and wanting to get back into the swing of things and get their jobs back and get their pride back and get a sense of accomplishment again, I think they believe in the dream that was created in those first 3 years of the Trump administration. And I think they're going to give them another chance to turn this around and bring back prosperity to Pennsylvania and to the rest of the country.
Everything Keith just said is exactly why I am in the opposite camp. Everything Keith just said is why I think Biden's going to win Pennsylvania. When I first became state Democratic chairman in 2010, Keith, those models you just mentioned, yes, I mean, that's how it was. We had Philadelphia with the massive population and 400 to 500,000 voter advantage for the Democratic statewide candidate coming out of Philly. And then you guys having to scramble around the state to try to overcome that discrepancy. Philadelphia, when it came out 12% or higher, you would get a 400 to 500,000 voter margin, and that was usually unbeatable. Until 2016, when Philly came out 475 to 500,000 for Hillary, and Trump still won the state. Why did that happen? It happened because of Western Pennsylvania and the blue-collar Democrats who didn't want Hillary and wanted to try somebody new. But then, like you said, in the last 10 years, those collar counties around Philadelphia, Montgomery, Chester, Bucks, Berks, Delaware, and don't forget Lehigh County up where Allentown is. That was blue, but it got even darker blue. So you guys would make up a lot of where you had your losses in Philly, right around Philly. You don't have that anymore. So where are you going to get it? You're coming out here to get it. Allegheny County isn't coming as strong as it used to for the Democratic Party. That's an issue in and of itself. But the counties around us, we used to always be able to count on Butler, Westmoreland, Greene, Washington, Cambria, not anymore. And now even Erie to some extent is in play. But it gets back to numbers, Keith and Stacy. It gets back to numbers. There aren't as many people in Western Pennsylvania, even if, like Keith said, correctly so, they're flipping red, these counties. There aren't enough people in those counties that have flipped red to overcome the 450 to 500,000 margin you're going to get out of Philadelphia and the Democratic votes you're getting out of those 5 to 6 collar counties, which is why I think Joe Biden will win this state.
Well, the only exception I'll take to what Jim said was it's 4 years ago. We didn't have the collar counties 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton won those counties by almost 200,000 votes. So we lost Philadelphia, we lost those color counties, and we still found enough votes to make up a victory in the popular vote in Pennsylvania. So I don't think those color counties are different now than they were 4 years ago. They weren't in play for us then. The question is going to be the intensity of the vote in Northeast PA, Southeast PA, Northeast, Northwest PA, and here in the Pittsburgh region.
Very, very quick. You won by 44,000 4 years ago mostly in Western Pennsylvania, because a lot of those blue-collar Democratic voters weren't comfortable with Hillary. They are comfortable with Joe Biden. So if all things stay the same, that one variable changes, we win.
Yeah, I think they are very comfortable with Joe Biden. And not only that, I think what no one's talking about here has to do with the need to change how we vote. Because we know that registrations across Pennsylvania, we have more Democrats than we have Republicans to start with. And are these blue collar voters, or are there a lot of these blue collar voters who aren't able to vote because it's only on one day, and maybe they're working overtime or they're working 2 or 3 jobs, unable to vote? I know that it was hard for my own dad to vote sometimes because he would have to leave to go to work at 6 in the morning before polls open, and he would get stuck with overtime and not get home till 9 o'clock. So we're talking about a change in our economy, a change in a situation where we need to have people being able to vote over longer periods of time and more accessible. And the mail-in voting, I think, is going to be a way that helps increase turnout, and this whole dynamic that we're talking about blue collar versus white collar and all that, we will see probably won't matter as much. It's all about turnout, all about turnout.
All right, let me ask this question. We're talking about blue collar versus white collar in this particular election. Which group do you think is more strident for this particular election that we have coming up? Is it because for the Democratic side, it's because they are so in love with Joe Biden, or that they really want to get rid of Donald Trump? And on the flip side, is it that the blue collar workers in the outer lands around that surround the cities and the T in Pennsylvania here, is it that they are just so in love with President Trump that they will flock to the polls again?
I think I saw a poll a month or so ago. 37% of the people that are going to vote for Joe Biden were coming out to vote for him because of him. The balance of them were coming out to vote against Donald Trump. I think it has increased more because now he has a running mate. Now he has started to get more specific on what he would do. And we've talked about that. Get more specific, Mr. Vice President, so people know what they have. They'll stick with the devil they know unless they know you have something better. So he's doing better at that. So I think a lot, well, the Democrats are coming for most of them were coming to vote against Donald Trump, Stacey. The Republicans that were coming out for Donald Trump because they are adamantly for him. They believe, for many of the reasons that our panel has articulated, that he is the right man and he's going to do better, and the economy is on the mend, and he has a plan for COVID.
When you say that, I want to throw out something. There's an article in the New York Times, and there's a picture for that article, and it talks about how Pennsylvania could indeed still go toward the president right now for a re-election. And there's a picture in there, and the slogan says, I'll smoke weed with Willie, but I'll never vote Democrat again. And it's out in the hinterlands somewhere. Willie meaning, of course, former President Bill Clinton. So it's, at least that's the way I interpreted it. So the question becomes, he says, I'll never vote Democrat again. These people have swung over, and there are many of them who will say that the Democratic Party let them down through the years. The reason they're going for President Trump is because he's given them some hope, and the Democratic Party seems to focus more on the cities.
To go back to just local government and state government, I see in Pennsylvania itself, with Governor Tom Wolf and the decision that he's made during this time, you have both parties, Republican and Democrat. You have the Republicans really fighting back and letting the local communities see how his decisions are impacting us, our small communities. And he's a Democratic governor. So you're seeing that a lot. And the question, or what's in most people's minds, I would say, blue collar or white collar, is who's fighting for me the most? Who's gonna do the most for me to get back to that normalcy? And no matter what things you come up with to help try to regain, whether it's passion, recreational marijuana legislation. It's just bring us back to where we were before COVID, and look at the numbers, look at the CDC, bring all that into consideration, and just get us back to where we were. I think in the state of Pennsylvania, it's going to be, it's as simple as that. You know, I think voter turnout's going to make a big impact with the new mail-in ballots, yes, but I think it really just boils down to who's going to do what. And I see in Lawrence County, blue-collar workers are red. I mean, I see it everywhere. You drive through town, in my town, you see a lot of Biden signs, but that silent voter and the conversations that are being had and the way people are going to vote, I think it is that they feel that Donald Trump has did a good job through the COVID pandemic.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we should talk about also was and I hate to keep going back to the Wall Street Journal, but there was a headline for a Gerald Sabe article the other day, and it said violence versus virus. And that's what he felt that the election could be coming down to. So let's tackle it, because Amanda, you talked about this a little while ago, the virus first. President Trump acknowledged to Bob Woodward that he played down the coronavirus earlier this year, even though he was aware that it was deadly. He said, I wanted to play it down. Mr. Trump told Woodward on March 19th, I still like playing it down because I don't want to create panic. Keith, was this the right approach by the president?
Oh, I think in hindsight's 2020. I think the president is consistent with his mantra to want to always, soften the blow. I think it's an honest statement to say, I did not want people to panic. I don't think that's a net negative. I think in the end, the resources that came out of the federal government, which is really what in the United States of America, states' rights are enormous. What the federal government could do in a time of crisis is provide the necessary resources downstream to states. And I think when you look at the argument that can be made that the president and his administration did everything they could to make sure those resources reached the states that needed it. Nobody went without a respirator. Nobody went without the necessary tools to continue to treat this virus. I mean, he stopped the travel from China almost immediately. He formed a task force. He did all the necessary steps necessary to deal with it at a federal level. There's a lot of people that think he should have done more, but a lot of this goes to the states and they're handling it as well. And I think if you do a report card on the president's handling of this virus and the Democratic governor's handling of this virus, it would be a hell of a toss-up. And I would argue that Democratic governors have cost us more than the response from the federal government.
I have to disagree with Keith here, because I work with a number of people who work in healthcare throughout this country. And this whole idea that they got everything that they needed is false. It's erroneous. They did not have everything that they needed. We even had New York Governor Cuomo telling everyone publicly how he had to compete with other states to get respirators and other materials and PPE that were needed in New York. So the whole idea that this response was not perfect, but was satisfactory is false. And when we look at, again, people who look like me being disproportionately impacted with this virus, the idea that he would downplay it when people are looking for the truth and need the truth is bothersome. It is bothersome. We're approaching 200,000 bodies. And we're talking about probably 300,000 by the election. And then to be joking about drinking, hand sanitizer or bleach, to be joking about that during a press briefing, and then people are doing it and having to go to the hospital, we have a mess on our hands. And it was only exacerbated, I think, by what this president did and didn't do.
Absolutely. Donald Trump owns this. Donald Trump lied. Donald Trump concealed powerful evidence and facts that could have saved 90% of the people who are now dead. That is 3 independent scientific studies. If he would have acted sooner, instead of diminishing the significance of this horrific virus, 90% of those dead Americans would be alive right now. Instead, he went out and called it a Democratic hoax. Instead, he concealed evidence from the governors. Instead, he tried to sweep it under the rug and behave. And instead, he refused to enact the War Powers Act to produce the things that all states needed. It is impossible for these states to manage something like this without the federal government taking the lead, which he has refused to do. So this is on his hands, in his hands alone. And look at the reaction that has happened in the last 24 hours since those audio tapes have been released. The Trump supporters are attacking Bob Woodward. It is inconsequential to them that the man who lied in February lied when he did and prevented a course of action that could have created a completely different narrative than we have right now. And if he had told the truth right away, and if he had done what he was supposed to do, 90% of those folks would still be alive. The economy would not have had to shut down, and people would still be at work. So his attempt to try to sweep this under a rug to get reelected had the opposite effect.
You say, I have to ask this because I've wondered about it. 90% of those who died could have been saved if he had done exactly what and how much sooner.
If he would have moved in a more decisive fashion, and again, look at the sources. I've read them, I've seen them. If he would have moved in a more decisive fashion, a week sooner to 2 weeks sooner is my understanding. If he would have enacted the War Powers Act, if he would have been more proactive on not just shutting down the West Coast, but shutting down the East Coast, a mask mandate, more direct action, more proactive action on mitigation, more proactivity on following the CDC guidelines instead of asking them to walk back their recommendations. That would have made all the difference in the world. If he would have done just those things early, the exponential spread that we saw because of his inaction would not have been as drastic.
All right. We're almost out of time. I would like to bring this up, and that's the second part of that quote, that headline, which was violence versus virus. Let's talk about the violence for a second here. Go back to the Democratic National Convention. Not once did the party talk about the violence that was happening in the streets. No talk about that at all. It seems the former vice president, though, is now blaming the president for the violence that did happen. Reaction, guys?
I'm seeing a shift in I know my community. I'm seeing a shift in the way of thinking where, you know, more folks were seeing it at the violence that was happening in other communities and blaming the Republican Party and blaming the president. And I'm seeing the shift kind of go now towards, as more information comes out and as more facts come out about each individual case and folks are starting to look deeper into it, each case individually, I think that the shift is now they're not blaming. It's not from my standpoint, there's not a political, it's not a part of the political reasoning for why these things are happening. Where the Republican Party traditionally is for the police, and then you have the Democratic Party kind of quote unquote they're the ones causing the issues. I'm seeing a little bit more understanding just across the board where people aren't feeling that it's the president's fault. I think they see it just more as, you know, where the Republican Party just looks at factual information. Folks who were, you know, especially on social media, who were blasting it, you know, that it was the president's fault months ago when it first all started. Now they're taking the time to actually look into some of this stuff, and the blame is being shifted that the Democratic Party continues to push that it is a Republican or the president's fault.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that the protests and the violence in the American cities are absolutely squarely hurting the vice president's chances to win the presidency. I think this coming at the time when they're talking about defunding police is just putting gas on the fire. I mean, the fact is, in my lifetime, for 2 generations, the GOP has owned law and order, and they're going to own it this election. The people in the suburbs and in rural America are becoming more and more scared about what's happening in urban America, and the fact that that all the pain that was dished out for the pandemic has been complicated by businesses being burned, people getting hurt, a sense of insecurity to even travel to American cities now. It furthers that divide when you were talking about white collar, blue collar. I mean, the fact is the cities are getting bluer, and rural and urban and suburban American are getting redder. But I can tell you, the people that it's hurting is for the Democrats are those swing Democrats in the suburban counties that are absolutely, in my mind, moving to support the president, leaving their party because they are absolutely in fear because of what's happening in American cities, north, south, east, and west.
Well, we have to remember, people have the right to protest. They have freedom of speech. And that's what's been happening here in the Pittsburgh area. And we know that a vast majority of these protests and rallies have been peaceful. And I would note that our police chief mentioned back in May, when there was the police car burning and all of that outside of PPG Arena, that it was people from the suburbs who had come into the city and started that and committed those acts of violence.
All right. That will wrap it up for this edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. I want to again thank all of you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.
Thanks, Stacy. Have a good week.
You too.